Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The crisp autumn air carried whispers through Fairhaven, Connecticut. What was once a town proud of its pristine reputation and close-knit community had become a place of hushed conversations and suspicious glances. 8 months had passed since Emily Mitchell vanished without a trace, but her absence still hung over the town like a heavy fog. On this particular morning, Sheriff Diana Reynolds stood on the shore of Lake Willow, the early September sun reflecting off the water's surface. Her weathered face remained stoic as she watched the Clean Rivers Project volunteers pulling a soggy purple backpack from the murky depths. One of the volunteers, a young man with earnest eyes, called out to her, "Sheriff, I think this might be important." Diana's heart sank as she recognized the backpack immediately. The hand-painted sunflowers on the front pocket were unmistakable, Emily's artistic signature. For months, the missing person posters around town had shown the vibrant 20-year-old art student wearing this very backpack. "Secure the area," Diana commanded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. This is now an active crime scene. As the yellow police tape went up, cutting off the peaceful lakeside path, curious onlookers began to gather. Among them was Robert Anderson, the distinguished history professor whose silver-streaked dark hair and tweed jacket had become a familiar sight at town meetings and search parties for Emily. "Is it hers?" he asked, approaching Diana with concern etched across his face. "Emily's?" Diana nodded grimly. "Looks like it. We'll know more after forensics." Robert shook his head, his hand running through his hair in apparent distress. 8 months. I was beginning to think we'd never find anything." He lowered his voice. "The poor Mitchell family. They've been through so much already." Diana studied him carefully. Robert Anderson had been a pillar of support since Emily's disappearance, organizing search parties, consoling the family, using his position on the city council to keep the case in the public eye. His dedication had been admirable, almost personal. "We'll need to inform them," Diana said, "and I'd appreciate if you'd keep this quiet until we've had that chance." "Of course," Robert agreed, his eyes drifting to the lake. "Whatever you need." As Diana turned to coordinate with her team, she missed the slight tremor in Robert's hand, the momentary flash of something unreadable crossing his features as he stared at the backpack now being sealed in an evidence bag. Across town, in a modest home surrounded by wind chimes and bird feeders, Margaret Mitchell sat at her kitchen table, clutching a cold cup of tea. The walls around her were covered with Emily's artwork, bright, hopeful canvases that contrasted sharply with the hollow look in Margaret's eyes. The phone beside her remained silent, just as it had for 8 agonizing months. "She's still out there," Margaret whispered to herself, a mantra repeated countless times since January. "My Emily is still out there." The doorbell's chime shattered her reverie, and Margaret's heart leaped into her throat as she saw Sheriff Reynolds' cruiser through the window. With trembling hands, she opened the door, bracing herself for news she had both longed for and dreaded. Little did Margaret know that the discovery at Lake Willow was only the beginning. The truth about what happened to her daughter was far darker than anyone in Fairhaven could have imagined, and it was hiding behind the respectable facade of someone they all trusted. The forensics lab hummed with activity as Diana watched technician Melissa Winters carefully examine Emily's backpack. Despite being submerged for months, the waterproof material had preserved several items inside: a sketchbook with partially legible drawings, a water-damaged student ID, and most significantly, a sealed plastic container containing a USB drive. "This is our best lead," Melissa said, holding up the small device. "Whoever dumped the bag didn't expect this to survive." Diana nodded, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. "How soon can we access it?" "Give me 24 hours. I'll extract whatever data remains." As Diana left the lab, her phone rang. Chief Deputy Marcus Holden's voice came through, tense and urgent. "Sheriff, we've got something from Emily's email records." The tech team finally cracked her password. "I'm on my way," Diana replied, quickening her pace. At the station, Marcus had already pulled up the emails on a monitor. "Look at this exchange from the day before she disappeared. It's with a private account, no name, just an address, history_mentor@privateemail.com. Diana leaned in, scanning the messages. The exchange started innocuously, discussing an independent research project, but the final email sent to Emily raised red flags. "Meet me at my private studio instead of campus. The address is 1823 Lakeview Drive. Come alone. I have sources that'll change everything about your thesis. Don't tell anyone academic jealousy is real." "Lakeview Drive," Diana muttered. "That's on the other side of Lake Willow." She straightened up. "Run a property search. Who owns 1823? Marcus typed rapidly, then looked up with wide eyes. "It's a rental property paid through a management company, but the tenant history shows it was leased to a shell corporation 8 months ago. Lease terminated just 2 weeks after Emily disappeared." Diana's instincts flared. "Get me everything on that corporation. And Marcus," she paused, lowering her voice, "keep this between us for now." As night fell over Fairhaven, Robert Anderson sat in his study, grading papers with meticulous precision. The television murmured in the background, a local news report covering the discovery at Lake Willow. Robert's pen paused mid-sentence as the reporter mentioned forensic evidence was being analyzed. His phone buzzed with a text from Diana. Town hall meeting tomorrow regarding the Mitchell case. Could use your support there. Robert replied immediately. Of course. Anything to help find the truth. Setting his phone down, he moved to the window, drawing the curtains shut before descending the stairs to his basement. What appeared to be a simple storage area contained a hidden panel behind a bookshelf. Robert pressed it, revealing a small room lined with soundproofing material. Inside, a desk held newspaper clippings about Emily's disappearance, arranged chronologically with his own handwritten notes in the margin. He ran his fingers over a photograph of Emily at last year's art exhibition, her smile bright, unaware of what lay ahead. It wasn't supposed to end this way, he whispered to the empty room. The next morning, Margaret Mitchell stood before her bathroom mirror, applying makeup for the first time in months. The town hall meeting would be difficult, but she was determined to face her neighbors with dignity. The discovery of Emily's backpack had reignited a flicker of hope, however painful. As she pinned Emily's artist pendant to her blouse, a birthday gift she now wore daily, her doorbell rang. Outside stood Diana, her expression grave but determined. There's been a development, Diana said, stepping inside. We've recovered data from a USB drive in Emily's backpack. Margaret's hand flew to her throat. What did you find? Research notes primarily, but also photos of specific historic buildings around town. One building appeared repeatedly, Professor Anderson's house. Margaret's brow furrowed. Robert? But he's been leading searches since day one, I know, Diana said carefully. Which makes what I need to ask next very difficult. Was Emily working on any special projects with him? No. Margaret shook her head firmly. Her advisor was Professor Kendrick in the art department. She mentioned Robert occasionally he'd given guest lectures on architectural history that she enjoyed. She paused, remembering something. Wait. About 2 weeks before she disappeared, Emily mentioned she was excited about a potential independent study opportunity, something about historical architecture in Fairhaven. I assumed it was with Kendrick. Diana nodded slowly. We've traced emails suggesting she was meeting someone about research the night she disappeared, at a private studio near Lake Willow. Margaret paled. You don't think Robert? I don't know yet, Diana answered honestly, but we're executing a search warrant at his residence this afternoon. Across town, the police assembled quietly outside Robert's Victorian home. Diana had deliberately scheduled the search during the town hall meeting where Robert was expected to speak. Inside, officers methodically examined each room while Diana supervised. The house was impeccably organized, reflecting its owner's methodical nature. Nothing seemed out of place until they reached the basement. Officer Jenkins called out from behind the bookshelf, "Sheriff, you need to see this." The hidden room stood open, revealing walls covered with Emily's case details. But what made Diana's blood run cold was a locked cedar chest in the corner. When forced open, it contained neatly folded women's clothing, a blue cardigan, a pair of paint-stained jeans, and a white blouse with a small sunflower embroidered on the collar. Diana recognized them immediately from Emily's missing person report. She lifted her radio. I need an evidence response team in the basement, and put out an APB for Robert Anderson. Approach with caution. Consider him dangerous. At the town hall, citizens gathered anxiously, murmuring about the backpack discovery. Mayor Judith Wilson tried calming the crowd, repeatedly checking her watch as Robert's chair remained conspicuously empty. The side door opened and Marcus slipped in, making his way directly to the mayor. He whispered something that drained the color from her face. She nodded stiffly before approaching the microphone. I regret to inform you that today's meeting must be postponed due to an urgent development in the Emily Mitchell case. The crowd erupted with questions. But Marcus was already escorting Margaret Mitchell out through a back exit, shielding her from the chaos about to descend on Fairhaven. In his silver Volvo, Robert Anderson drove calmly toward the interstate, talk radio providing background noise to his racing thoughts. When his phone rang, he glanced at Diana's name on the screen. After a moment's hesitation, he switched the phone off and tossed it out the window into a passing field. I'm sorry, Emily, he whispered to himself as Fairhaven disappeared in his rearview mirror. It was never supposed to end this way. News of Robert Anderson's disappearance and the disturbing discovery in his basement spread through Fairhaven like wildfire. By nightfall, the story had reached national media outlets, transforming their quiet New England town into the center of a sensational manhunt. Camera crews stationed themselves outside the Anderson residence, where forensic teams continued to process evidence behind police barricades. Diana stood in the hidden room, now brightly lit with portable lamps as technicians dusted for fingerprints and collected fibers. The air felt thick with the weight of betrayal, not just of Emily, but of an entire community that had trusted Robert Anderson. Sheriff, called Melissa, now on site with her mobile lab equipment. You need to see this. Diana approached a wall where Melissa had sprayed luminol, revealing faint blue patches glowing eerily in the darkened corner. Blood? Diana asked, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. Yes, but it's been meticulously cleaned. Professional-grade cleaners. Whoever did this knew exactly how to minimize evidence. Melissa pointed to several spots. Multiple drops, spatter pattern consistent with blunt force trauma. We'll run DNA tests, but it's likely Emily's, Diana finished grimly. Melissa nodded. There's more. We found tiny fragments of glass embedded in the wall, consistent with a broken picture frame or mirror. And these, she held up an evidence bag containing several long brown hairs, found them trapped in the cedar chest hinges. Diana took a deep breath. Good work. Fast-track everything through the lab. She turned to leave but paused as something caught her eye. A small notebook wedged behind the desk, partially visible. Carefully, she extracted it using gloved hands. Inside were meticulous notes written in Robert's precise handwriting. Observations about Emily's routines, her favorite coffee shop, her jogging path, even the time she visited her mother. The final entry, dated the day before Emily's disappearance, contained just 3 words. Tomorrow is time. Diana felt a chill run through her body. This wasn't an impulsive crime or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was calculated, planned for months. But why? What had driven a respected academic to such darkness? Meanwhile, at the Mitchell home, Margaret sat motionless on her couch, surrounded by friends who had rushed to her side after the news broke. Their well-intentioned comfort felt distant, like sounds underwater. Her mind kept replaying every interaction she'd ever had with Robert, his sympathetic eyes at the first community search party, his hand on her shoulder at the 3-month memorial, his passionate speeches at city council meetings demanding more resources for the investigation. He looked me in the eyes, she whispered, causing conversations around her to halt. He looked me in the eyes while knowing exactly what happened to my daughter. Her friend Susan squeezed her hand. None of us saw this coming, Margaret. He fooled everyone. Margaret shook her head slowly. Not everyone. Emily. Her voice broke. The week before she disappeared, she mentioned feeling uncomfortable around one of her professors. Said he'd been paying special attention to her work, offering private mentoring. She closed her eyes, the memory piercing her heart like a blade. I told her it was a good thing, that she should be flattered by the recognition. A knock at the door interrupted them. Susan opened it to find Marcus standing there, his expression graved. Mrs. Mitchell, he said gently. Sheriff Reynolds asked me to bring you to the station. There are developments you should hear in person. Across state lines, Robert Anderson checked into a roadside motel under the name James Burton, paying cash and avoiding eye contact with the clerk. Inside his sparse room, he placed his single suitcase on the bed and turned on the television. His own face stared back at him from the screen, accompanied by a news ticker announcing a nationwide manhunt. Robert sank into the chair, watching as reporters pieced together their narrative of a respected professor's secret life. They didn't understand. None of them could possibly understand what had happened. He opened his suitcase and removed a worn leather journal. Not the methodical stalking notes found by police, but something far more personal. Inside were decades of entries dating back to his college years, each documenting his struggles with what he called the shadow, intrusive thoughts that had plagued him since adolescence. Robert flipped to an entry from 9 months ago. Saw her again today. The resemblance is uncanny. Same eyes, same laugh, even the way she tucks her hair behind her ear. It's like seeing Elizabeth again, returned to me across the decades. Is this my chance to make things right? Or am I simply losing my grip on reality? He closed the journal, unable to face his own words. Elizabeth Parker had been his first love, a talented art student who'd ended their relationship 30 years ago. She died in a car accident weeks later, a tragedy Robert had never fully processed. When Emily Mitchell walked into his architectural history lecture last year, the striking resemblance had awakened something dormant inside him, an obsession that had spiraled beyond his control. Back in Fairhaven, Diana sat across from Margaret in her office, the cedar chest now sealed in evidence bags on the table between them. I need you to confirm these belong to Emily, Diana said gently. With trembling hands, Margaret examined the photos of the clothing. Yes, she whispered. The cardigan was a Christmas gift, and this blouse, her voice caught. She wore it to her last exhibition. The sunflower was her own addition. She embroidered it herself. Diana nodded solemnly. Margaret, I need to prepare you. The evidence we're gathering suggests that Emily may no longer be alive. Margaret's face remained remarkably composed, though tears streamed silently down her cheeks. I've lived with that possibility for 8 months, Diana. What I can't live with is not knowing what happened to my daughter. We're doing everything, Diana began, but was interrupted by Marcus bursting through the door. We've got a hit on Anderson's credit card, he announced breathlessly. Gas station in Millfield, about 2 hours north. Purchase made 30 minutes ago. Diana was on her feet instantly. Alert state police. I want roadblocks on every major route out of Millfield. She turned to Margaret. I have to go. Margaret stood, squaring her shoulders with unexpected strength. Find him, Diana. Make him tell you where Emily is. As Diana and Marcus raced north in their cruiser, lights flashing and siren wailing, Diana's phone rang. It was Melissa from the lab. Sheriff, preliminary DNA results confirm it's Emily's blood in the hidden room, she reported. And we found something else. Partial fingerprints on the inside of the cedar chest that don't match Robert or Emily. Diana frowned. A third person? Are you sure? Positive. We're running them through the system now. The revelation sent Diana's mind racing. Had Robert been working with an accomplice? Or was there more to this story than they'd uncovered? Just outside Millfield, at a sparsely populated rest area, Robert sat in his car, staring at the burner phone in his hand. After several moments of internal struggle, he dialed a number from memory. "It's me," he said when the line connected. "They found the backpack. They've been to the house." The voice on the other end was calm, controlled. "That's unfortunate, Robert. Where are you now?" "Heading north, but they'll have the credit card trail by now." "Sloppy," the voice admonished. "We've discussed this contingency. You were supposed to be more careful." "I can't do this anymore," Robert said, his composure finally cracking. "Emily's mother deserves to know the truth." A long silence followed. "We had an agreement, Robert. Remember who has more to lose. This has gone too far. I never wanted what you wanted ceased to matter the moment you brought me into this." The voice cut in sharply. "Go to the backup location as planned. Destroy this phone. I'll contact you when it's safe." The line went dead, leaving Robert alone with his mounting dread. He stared at the phone for several seconds before rolling down his window and hurling it into the dense woods beyond the rest area. Then, with shaking hands, he started his car and pulled back onto the highway, not north toward the Canadian border as investigators suspected, but west toward a destination known only to him and his mysterious phone contact. In Fairhaven, the pieces of the puzzle were still scattered, the full picture of what happened to Emily Mitchell yet to emerge. But as Diana closed in on her primary suspect, the truth was already beginning to shift and morph into something far more complex than anyone had anticipated. The clock ticked past midnight as Diana and Marcus returned to Fairhaven, their pursuit of Robert Anderson having ended in frustration. The lead in Millfield had proven to be a false trail. Security footage revealed a teenager who had found Anderson's discarded credit card and used it to fill his tank, unwittingly triggering the alert. "He's gone dark," Diana said, rubbing her tired eyes as they entered the station. "No credit cards, no phone. He's either been planning this for months or he has help. Or both," Marcus added grimly. They walked into the conference room, now transformed into a command center for the investigation. Maps, timelines, and photographs covered the walls, with Emily's smiling face at the center, a reminder of what was at stake. Melissa was waiting for them, dark circles under her eyes betraying her own exhaustion. "We got a hit on those partial prints," she announced, "but it doesn't make sense." She handed Diana a file. Inside was a profile that made the sheriff's breath catch. Dr. James Kendrick, 52, Emily's art department advisor. Kendrick? Diana's mind raced. Margaret specifically mentioned him when I asked about Emily's professors. Marcus frowned. "But why would his prints be in Anderson's hidden room?" "That's what we need to find out," Diana said, reaching for her phone. "Get a warrant for Kendrick's residence and office and put surveillance on him immediately, discreetly. If he's involved, I don't want him spooked." As she dialed, Diana contemplated the implications. One respected professor was already implicated in Emily's disappearance. Could another be involved? And if so, how deep did this conspiracy go? Across town, in a modernist home on the edge of the university campus, Dr. James Kendrick sat in his dimly lit studio, nursing a glass of scotch. The television murmured news of the manhunt for his colleague, but Kendrick's attention was fixed on the canvas before him, a half-finished portrait of a young woman with familiar features. His phone buzzed with a text. "They found my prints. Get out now." Kendrick's hand trembled slightly as he deleted the message. Unlike Robert, he would not panic. Unlike Robert, he had prepared for this possibility with meticulous care. He rose calmly, moving to his desk where he retrieved a small key from a hidden compartment. This key opened a fireproof safe concealed behind a bookshelf, from which he extracted a thumb drive and a passport under the name Martin Webb. After one last look around the studio that had been his sanctuary for over 20 years, Kendrick picked up his pre-packed emergency bag and walked out the back door. Dawn was breaking when Diana arrived at Kendrick's home, search warrant in hand. The house stood silent, morning dew still undisturbed on the lawn. When repeated knocks went unanswered, Diana signaled to the officers behind her. "Break it down." The door gave way with a splintering crack, revealing an immaculate interior. Too immaculate. Diana had seen enough hasty departures to recognize the signs closets with empty hangers, bathroom shelves cleared of toiletries, desk drawers left slightly ajar. "He's gone," she said, frustration evident in her voice. "Put out an APB immediately." In the studio at the back of the house, Diana found what appeared to be Kendrick's workstation. Canvases lined the walls, most featuring landscapes or abstract compositions, but one easel stood in the center, covered with a cloth. Diana approached it cautiously, lifting the fabric to reveal an unfinished portrait of Emily Mitchell. The likeness was striking, but something about the eyes was wrong. They held an expression Emily's photographs never showed. Fear. "Marcus," Diana called, not taking her eyes off the painting. "Get CSI in here now." A thorough search of the studio yielded several disturbing findings: a locked drawer containing sketches of Emily in various poses, some clearly drawn without her knowledge, a collection of small items that appeared to be personal effects, a hair clip, a paintbrush, a coffee shop receipt with Emily's signature, and most damning, a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards containing a USB drive and a journal. The journal, unlike Robert's methodical stalking notes, contained elaborate fantasies about Emily's descriptions of conversations that never happened, plans for a future together, and increasingly disturbed musings about removing obstacles and creating our perfect world. Diana's phone rang as she was examining these findings. It was the tech analyst who had been assigned to extract data from the USB drive found in Emily's backpack. Sheriff, you need to see this, the analyst said urgently. I've recovered deleted files from the drive. They're emails between Emily Mitchell and Professor Kendrick, but some of them, they don't sound like they came from Emily. What do you mean? Diana asked. The writing style changes drastically in emails dated after her disappearance. It's subtle, but when analyzed computationally, it's clear they were written by someone else, someone pretending to be Emily. Diana's mind raced with the implications. Send everything to my email, and put a trace on all of Kendrick's known accounts. If he goes online, I want to know about it. Meanwhile, Margaret Mitchell sat in Emily's bedroom, which remained untouched since her disappearance. The walls were covered with her daughter's artwork, vibrant landscapes, detailed architectural studies, and portraits of people who had captured her attention. One small sketch caught Margaret's eye, a quick study of Professor Anderson looking contemplative during a lecture. Beside it was another sketch, this one of Professor Kendrick critiquing a student's work, his expression stern but encouraging. The two men who had been fixtures in Emily's academic life, the two men now implicated in her disappearance. Margaret's gaze fell on Emily's desk calendar, still open to January, the month she vanished. Most days contained typical student notations, class times, assignment deadlines, coffee dates with friends. But the day of her disappearance held a cryptic note. Special project meeting, 7 p.m. to both. The realization hit Margaret like a physical blow. Emily hadn't been meeting one professor that night. She'd been meeting both of them. With shaking hands, Margaret dialed Diana's number. 70 miles west of Fairhaven, in a remote cabin accessible only by a narrow dirt road, Robert Anderson paced anxiously. The television was tuned to a 24-hour news channel, which had been covering the investigation non-stop. The latest update reported that police were now searching for a second suspect, Dr. James Kendrick. It's falling apart, Robert muttered to himself. Everything is falling apart. A noise outside made him freeze. Through the window, he could see headlights approaching, a vehicle navigating the treacherous road with confidence. Robert's heart pounded as he recognized the black SUV. Moments later, James Kendrick entered the cabin, his composed demeanor a stark contrast to Robert's obvious distress. "You shouldn't have come here," Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They could be tracking you." Kendrick smiled thinly. "Unlike you, I didn't leave an obvious trail. I've been preparing for this possibility far longer than you have, Robert." He moved to the kitchenette, helping himself to a glass of water as casually as if they were meeting for a faculty lunch. "We need to coordinate our stories." "Stories?" Robert's voice rose in disbelief. "James, they found her clothes in my house. Your fingerprints were there. They'll find the connection between us eventually." "Perhaps," Kendrick conceded, "but they still don't have the most important piece of the puzzle." His eyes locked with Robert's. "They don't have Emily." Robert sank into a chair, his face ashen. "This has gone too far. We need to tell him the truth." "The truth?" Kendrick's calm facade cracked slightly, revealing a flash of something cold beneath. "The truth is that you became obsessed with a student because she reminded you of your long-dead girlfriend. The truth is that you involved me in your twisted fantasy. The truth is that neither of us can walk away from this unscathed. I never wanted her to get hurt," Robert insisted. "That night, it wasn't supposed to happen that way." Kendrick's expression hardened. "Yet it did happen, Robert. And we both made choices afterward." He glanced at his watch. "We have a narrow window of opportunity. The cabin is secure for now, but we need to move to the contingency location by tomorrow." As Kendrick outlined their next steps, Robert's gaze drifted to a closed door at the back of the cab, a door secured with a padlock, behind which lay the answers Diana Reynolds was so desperately seeking. In Fairhaven, Diana stood in the evidence room, examining the newly assembled connection board linking Anderson and Kendrick. What had initially appeared to be the work of a single predator now revealed itself as something far more complex, a partnership between two manipulative professors with an inexplicable fixation on Emily Mitchell. "What am I missing?" Diana murmured, studying the photographs and timelines before her. Her phone rang, displaying Margaret Mitchell's name. "Margaret? What is it?" Diana asked. Margaret's voice came through, steady despite her obvious distress. "I found something in Emily's calendar. The day she disappeared, she wrote special project meetings, 7 p.m. both. Diana, I think she was meeting Anderson and Kendrick together that night." The final piece clicked into place. Diana thanked Margaret and immediately called Marcus. Pull every property record for both Anderson and Kendrick, she instructed. Look for overlaps, connections, only where they might be hiding out together. As night fell over New England, the hunt intensified, narrowing in on the dark partnership that had appended so many lives in Fairhaven. Somewhere in the forests beyond the reach of search parties and police scanners, two professors and their secrets waited, and possibly, just possibly, so did Emily Mitchell. Dawn broke over the dense forests west of Fairhaven as Diana's cruiser navigated the winding roads. Marcus beside her reviewing property records on his tablet. They had been driving for hours. Following a tenuous lead uncovered in the early morning, a hunting cabin registered to a corporation that, after several layers of shell companies, connected to James Kendrick's ex-wife. It's remote, Marcus said, studying the satellite imagery. About a quarter-mile from the nearest access road. No neighbors for miles. Diana's grip tightened on the steering wheel. 24 hours had passed since they discovered Kendrick's involvement, and every minute felt critical. How much further? According to GPS, we take the next right onto a fire road. After that, it's unmarked. As they turned onto a barely visible dirt path, Diana killed the lights and slowed to a crawl. If Anderson and Kendrick were indeed holed up here, the element of surprise might be their only advantage. She pulled off the road about half a mile from their destination, concealing the vehicle behind a thick stand of pines. State Police Tactical Unit is 20 minutes out, Marcus whispered as they checked their weapons. We should wait. Diana shook her head. We observe only. If they're here, we can't risk them slipping away again. They advanced through the forest on foot, moving silently across the leaf-strewn ground. As they crested a small hill, the cabin came into view, a rustic structure nestled against a backdrop of ancient oaks. A black SUV was parked outside, matching the description of Kendrick's vehicle. That's them, Diana breathed, raising her binoculars. Through the cabin's front window, she could make out two figures engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion. Even from this distance, Robert Anderson's agitated movements were unmistakable. Kendrick, by contrast, remained seated, his posture rigid and controlled. What's the play? Marcus asked, his voice barely audible. Before Diana could answer, the cabin door swung open. Anderson emerged, pacing on the small porch, his face contorted with visible distress. He ran his hands through his disheveled hair repeatedly, his mouth moving rapidly as if arguing with himself. Diana's radio crackled softly, the tactical unit checking in. She responded with their coordinates in hushed tones, instructing them to approach with extreme caution. Inside the cabin, James Kendrick watched Robert's breakdown through the window with cold calculation. Their partnership, built on mutual obsession and shared secrets, was fracturing under pressure. Robert had always been the weaker link, brilliant but unstable, passionate but prone to panic. Kendrick moved to the locked door at the back of the cabin, removing a key from around his neck. The small room beyond had been his private domain, a space Robert was forbidden to enter. Inside, meticulously organized art supplies lined the walls, expensive brushes, premium paints, canvases of various sizes. A drafting table dominated the center, covered with sketches of Emily Mitchell in various poses, some realistic, others idealized and fantasized. But it was the piece on the easel that commanded attention, a nearly completed portrait of Emily, rendered with disturbing precision. In this version, her eyes held none of the fear visible in the unfinished work at his home studio. Here she gazed out with adoration, the kind of look Kendrick had longed to see directed at him in reality. He ran his fingers lightly over the canvas, caressing the painted cheek with unsettling tenderness. Almost perfect, he murmured. Almost. From a small refrigerator in the corner, he removed a vial of red liquid, uncapping it with practiced ease. Using the finest brush in his collection, he added subtle highlights to the portrait, a touch of warmth to the lips, a hint of flush to the cheeks. The medium he used wasn't paint. Outside, Robert's pacing had become more frantic. The weight of what they had done, what they were still doing, pressed down on him with suffocating force. Unlike Kendrick, who had embraced their dark path with disturbing serenity, Robert found himself increasingly haunted by memories of that January night when everything spiraled beyond control. He remembered Emily's excited expression when she arrived at the studio, portfolio in hand, eager to discuss the special architectural photography project they had proposed. He remembered her growing confusion as the conversation shifted. As Kendrick began talking about her unique beauty and artistic potential as a subject rather than an artist, he remembered her fear when she realized the true nature of their interest in her, her attempt to leave, Kendrick blocking the door, the argument that followed, the push that sent her crashing into the glass display case. The blood. So much blood. Robert bent over, suddenly nauseous with the memory. What had started as an unhealthy fixation had transformed into something monstrous. And now, 8 months later, he found himself unable to distinguish between the man he had been and the creature he had become. In the forest, Diana watched Anderson's increasingly erratic behavior with mounting concern. Something was clearly triggering him, pushing him towards some kind of breaking point. If he fled in panic, they might lose their best chance at finding answers. Tactical is 5 minutes out, Marcus whispered. Should we move in now? Diana weighed their options quickly. We need to. Her decision was interrupted by the sharp crack of a gunshot from inside the cabin. Anderson froze on the porch, then burst back through the door, shouting something inaudible from their position. Move in, Diana ordered, abandoning stealth for speed. Marcus circled around back. They sprinted toward the cabin, weapons drawn. Diana reached the porch just as another shot rang out, followed by the sound of breaking glass. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door, heart pounding. "Professor Anderson!" she called out. "This is Sheriff Reynolds. Come out with your hands up." Silence answered her. Then, unexpectedly, Robert's voice came from inside, high and strained with panic. "He's gone crazy! He's going to kill her!" "Her?" Diana's blood ran cold. Could Emily Mitchell somehow still be alive after all these months? "Robert, I'm coming in," Diana announced. "Keep your hands visible." She entered the cabin in a tactical crouch, scanning for threats. The main room was empty, but a trail of blood droplets led toward the back, where a splintered door hung from broken hinges. Beyond it, a smaller room appeared to have been ransacked, art supplies scattered across the floor, furniture overturned. A large window at the back had been shattered outward, glass glittering on the ground outside. Through it, Diana could see Marcus in pursuit of a figure disappearing into the trees. Kendrick, presumably. Robert Anderson sat slumped against the wall, blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder. His eyes were wide with shock, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Where is she, Robert?" Diana demanded, keeping her weapon trained on him even as she assessed his injury. "Where's Emily?" Robert's laugh held no humor, only despair. "You don't understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You never understood." "Then help me understand," Diana pressed, aware that every second mattered. "Is Emily alive?" Robert's gaze drifted to a canvas that had fallen face down during the struggle. James. He wouldn't let her go. Not even after. Diana holstered her weapon and crouched beside him, applying pressure to his wound with one hand while reaching for the fallen canvas with the other. As she turned it over, the portrait came into view. Emily Mitchell rendered in loving detail, her eyes alive with an expression Diana had never seen in photographs. The paint at the edges still glistened, wet and vibrant red. "What is this?" Diana whispered, though a sickening realization was already forming. "His masterpiece," Robert replied, his eyes filling with tears. "He said he needed to preserve her, perfect her." A shout from outside interrupted them, Marcus calling for backup. Diana keyed her radio, instructing the incoming tactical team to converge on Marcus's position. "Robert," she said, returning her full attention to the wounded man, "I need you to focus. Where is Emily? What happened to her?" Robert's gaze shifted to another door, this one metal, secured with multiple locks, partially concealed behind a bookshelf. "We never meant for anyone to get hurt," he said, his voice fading as shock set in. "It was supposed to be art. Perfect, beautiful art." As the tactical team swarmed the property, Diana approached the metal door with growing dread. With help from 2 officers, they breached the locks, revealing a staircase descending into darkness below the cabin. Diana led the way down, flashlight illuminating a space that defied all her worst expectations. The basement had been converted into a preservation studio with specialized equipment, chemicals, and tools arranged with scientific precision. In the center stood what appeared to be a glass display case draped with a heavy cloth. With a steadying breath, Diana approached and lifted the covering. The gasp that escaped her was involuntary, echoed by the officers behind her. Emily Mitchell lay within the case, her body preserved through some macabre taxidermic process. She wore the blue cardigan found in Anderson's home, positioned as if captured mid-sketch, a peaceful expression artificially arranged on her features. Around the case, dozens of photographs documented the process of her transformation from victim to eternal art piece. Diana stepped back, a wave of nausea threatening to overwhelm her. In her 15 years of law enforcement, she had witnessed many horrors, but nothing had prepared her for this. The revelation that the professor's obsession had extended far beyond, stalking into the realm of the truly depraved. Outside, the radio crackled with urgent updates. Marcus had lost Kendrick in the dense forest, but the tactical team had established a perimeter. The manhunt would continue, now with the full understanding of what and who they were dealing with. As Diana climbed the stairs back to the main cabin, a terrible weight settled on her shoulders. She would have to tell Margaret Mitchell that her daughter had been found at last, but in a manner too horrific for any mother to comprehend. The Fairhaven Community Center had been transformed into a command post for what had become the largest manhunt in Connecticut state history. 3 days had passed since the discovery at the cabin, and James Kendrick remained at large despite roadblocks, helicopter surveillance, and search teams combing the surrounding forests. Diana stood before a map dotted with colored pins representing possible sightings and search zones. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed her lack of sleep, but her focus remained razor sharp. This case had ceased to be merely professional. It had become a personal mission to bring Kendrick to justice. "We've expanded the search radius to 50 miles, Marcus reported, joining her at the map. "State police have checkpoints on every major highway, and his photo is running hourly on all news channels." Diana nodded, her gaze fixed on the red pin marking the cabin. "He won't use main roads. He's too methodical for that." She traced a finger along the map's blue lines. "These waterways? Could he navigate them? Or possibly. The Blackwater River runs north for about 30 miles before joining the Connecticut River, if he had a boat stashed. Check with local marinas, fishing cabins, anywhere he might have prepared a water escape route. Kendrick strikes me as someone who plans multiple contingencies." As Marcus left to make the calls, Diana's phone rang the forensics team at the cabin. "Sheriff, we've completed the initial analysis of Kendrick's journals," the lead technician reported. "There's something you should know. The preservation techniques used on Emily Mitchell weren't improvised. They were researched extensively. Journals document a year of preparation before she disappeared." Diana's blood ran cold. A year? Then Emily wasn't his first target? No, but she was the first he acted on. The journals contained detailed observations of at least 3 other female art students dating back 5 years. He refers to them as potential vessels. And Anderson? How long was he involved? According to the timeline we've reconstructed, Kendrick approached Anderson about 10 months ago after noticing his interest in Emily. He seems to have manipulated Anderson's obsession, gradually pulling him into his own darker fantasy. Diana thanked the technician and ended the call, her mind processing the implications. Kendrick was more dangerous than they had initially realized, not an opportunistic killer who panicked, but a calculating predator who had spent years refining his horrific vision. Across town, in the mortuary where Emily Mitchell's body had been transported, Margaret sat alone in a small waiting room. The medical examiner had gently advised against viewing her daughter's remains, explaining the extensive alterations Kendrick had made in his twisted preservation process. Instead, they had given her Emily's silver artist's pendant, the one item that remained untouched, still containing a small photograph of Margaret inside the locket. Mayor Judith Wilson entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Margaret and sat beside her, the weight of leadership and friendship evident in her tired eyes. "The media's been calling nonstop," Judith said quietly. "I've instructed my office to direct all inquiries to the police. You shouldn't have to deal with their questions." Margaret nodded absently, turning the pendant over in her hands. "Have they found him yet?" "Not yet. But Diana's the best sheriff this county has ever had. She won't stop until she does." Margaret's expression hardened. "I want to see him when they catch him. I need to look him in the eyes and ask why." Her voice, though quiet, carried steel. Emily trusted her professors. She believed in the sanctity of education, in the goodness of people who dedicate their lives to teaching. Judith placed a hand over Margaret's. "I know. The entire university is in shock. No one saw this darkness in Kendrick. He was respected, admired even. That's what makes it so horrifying," Margaret whispered. "The monster hiding in plain sight." At Fairhaven Memorial Hospital, Robert Anderson lay handcuffed to his bed, a police officer stationed outside his door. His gunshot wound had been treated, a through-and-through to the shoulder that would heal without permanent damage. The same could not be said for his psychological state. Diana entered his room, dismissing the officer with a nod. She pulled a chair to Anderson's bedside, noting how he seemed to have aged a decade in just a few days. His distinguished appearance had deteriorated into that of a broken man, hollow-eyed and diminished. "The district attorney has approved a deal," Diana began without preamble. "In exchange for your full cooperation, every detail about Kendrick, his plans, his possible hideouts, they'll consider reduced charges. Second-degree murder instead of first. Possibility of parole after 25 years. Robert's gaze remained fixed on the ceiling. "I deserve worse." "This isn't about what you deserve," Diana said, her voice hardening. "This is about finding Kendrick before he disappears forever or, God forbid, finds another vessel for his art." The word made Robert flinch visibly. "I never knew. Not at first. I thought he understood my fascination with Emily because she reminded me of Elizabeth. I thought he was helping me connect with her mentor." He finally met Diana's eyes. "By the time I realized what he truly wanted, I was already implicated." "Tell me about that night, Robert, January 18th. What really happened at the studio?" Robert closed his eyes, the memories washing over him in painful waves. "Emily arrived excited about the architectural photography project we'd proposed. She brought her portfolio, samples of her work. James was charming at first, complimentary. Then he started talking about her beauty, how she deserved to be immortalized." His voice faltered. "She became uncomfortable, said she needed to leave. James blocked the door. I tried to defuse the situation, told him we should let her go. He became enraged, accused me of betraying our vision. There was a struggle. Robert's breathing quickened. Emily tried to run. James grabbed her. She fell against the glass display case. There was so much blood. And afterward?" Diana pressed, recording every word. "I panicked, wanted to call an ambulance. James stopped me, said it was too late, that we'd both go to prison. He had materials prepared. said he could preserve her, make her immortal through his art. Robert's face contorted with self-loathing. I was weak, terrified. I helped him move her body to the cabin. And for 8 months you pretended to search for her, led community efforts to find her. James said it would divert suspicion, that no one would look at the grief-stricken professors searching tirelessly for their missing student. I told myself I was honoring her memory somehow. But every time I faced Margaret Mitchell, saw her hope dimming day by day, the guilt became unbearable. Diana leaned forward. Where would Kendrick go now, Robert? Where would he feel safe? Robert was silent for a long moment. There's a place. An old lighthouse keeper's cottage on the Maine coast. James spent summers there as a child. His family sold it years ago, but he always talked about it as his sanctuary, his perfect studio by the sea. Do you know where exactly? Near Pemaquid Point? He has a painting of it in his campus office, a white cottage with blue shutters, perched on rocky cliffs. Diana stood immediately, already dialing Marcus. If you're lying to me, Robert, I'm not, he interrupted, his voice breaking. Please find him. Stop him before he does this to someone else. As Diana hurried from the hospital to coordinate with Maine authorities, a storm was brewing over the Atlantic, moving steadily toward the New England coast. On a rugged peninsula, 80 miles northeast of Portland, the lighthouse at Pemaquid Point cast its beam across increasingly turbulent waters. Half a mile down the shore, in a white cottage with weathered blue shutters, James Kendrick methodically unpacked his essential supplies. The old property had been purchased through another shell company 3 years earlier, one of many contingency plans he had, established long before setting his sights on Emily Mitchell. The cottage's remote location and the approaching storm provided ideal conditions for him to regroup and consider his options. The authorities would be searching for him, certainly, but they would be looking for Professor James Kendrick, respected academic, art department fixture, community leader. From a leather case, he removed a passport and identification documents for Martin Webb, complete with altered appearance details. Next came specialized makeup and hair dye that would further transform him. Finally, he extracted a small notebook, not one of his artistic journals, but a contact book containing names and addresses of private collectors who specialized in unconventional art and asked no questions about provenance. His work with Emily had been a breakthrough, a masterpiece born of years of planning and technical refinement. But it had also been a learning experience. Next time he would make no mistakes. Next time there would be no Robert Anderson to falter at the critical moment. Kendrick moved to the cottage's front window, watching the storm clouds gather on the horizon. The first fat raindrops began to strike the glass as thunder rumbled in the distance. He smiled slightly, feeling a familiar creative stirring within him. Perhaps it was time to begin sketching his next subject, the next vessel for his artistic vision. In Fairhaven, as darkness fell and the storm approached from the northeast, Margaret Mitchell stood at her daughter's bedroom window. The room remained exactly as Emily had left it that January evening, art supplies arranged on the desk, half-finished sketches pinned to corkboards, a coffee mug still bearing the faint imprint of her lipstick. For 8 agonizing months, Margaret had preserved this space, clinging to hope that Emily would return to reclaim it. Now, knowing the horrific truth, she faced the impossible task of moving forward, of finding meaning in a world that had revealed its capacity for such darkness. She gently touched one of Emily's sketches, an architectural study of Fairhaven's historic downtown, rendered with the skilled hand and artistic eye that had made her professors take notice, the same talent that had ultimately made her a target. "I will not let this be your legacy," Margaret whispered to the empty room. "I promise you that, my darling girl." As rain began to patter against the window, Margaret Mitchell made a silent vow that from the ashes of this tragedy, she would forge something meaningful, something that might protect others from the predators that hid behind respectable facades and positions of trust. The storm had arrived in Fairhaven, but an even greater tempest was building within Margaret, one that would eventually change the landscape of academia and student safety across the country. And 70 miles away, racing against the same storm front, Diana Reynolds led a convoy of law enforcement vehicles northward toward the Maine coast, determined that James Kendrick's reign of horror would end before another young woman fell victim to his twisted artistic vision. The storm intensified as Diana's convoy crossed the Maine state line, rain hammering against the windshields with such force that even the highest wiper settings struggled to maintain visibility. Weather alerts blared from the radio, warning of coastal flooding and wind gusts approaching hurricane strength. Under normal circumstances, they would have pulled over to wait out the worst of it, but these were not normal circumstances. "Maine State Police have the coastal roads covered," Marcus reported from the passenger seat, phone pressed to his ear. "Local sheriff has deputies positioned at the 3 main access points to Pemaquid Peninsula. Coast Guard has been notified, but they're saying water rescue operations will be nearly impossible." Diana nodded grimly, hands tight on the steering wheel as she navigated a particularly treacherous curve. If Kendrick planned this escape route, he would have factored in the weather patterns. The storm might be exactly what he's counting on, limiting our mobility while providing cover for his own movements. Lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating the rain-swept landscape in stark white. In that flash, Diana caught sight of a road sign, Pemaquid Point, 18 miles. "We need to coordinate with local authorities," she said. "Someone who knows the peninsula intimately. If there are unofficial access points, hiking trails, maintenance roads, boat launches, Kendrick will have identified them." Marcus made the call, and within minutes they were patched through to Captain Michael Dawson of the Bristol Area Sheriff's Department, a 30-year veteran who had patrolled the peninsula his entire career. "That cottage you're looking for sits on Osprey Cliffs," Dawson's gruff voice explained. "Only one road leads directly to it, but there's an old service path that connects to the lighthouse grounds. Normally only accessible by foot, but if your suspect knows the area well enough, he might use it as an escape route." "Can you meet us there?" Diana asked. "Already en route. My deputy and I will approach from the lighthouse side. In this weather, we'll have the element of surprise. Nobody expects visitors during a nor'easter." The convoy regrouped at a small ranger station 10 miles from their destination, where Captain Dawson, a weathered man with silver hair and the sturdy build of someone who had spent a lifetime in harsh coastal conditions, briefed them on the terrain. "Osprey Cliffs rise about 90 feet above the water," he explained, pointing to a topographical map spread across the hood of his vehicle. "The cottage sits here, 50 yards from the edge. Dense woods on the north side provide cover, but limited mobility. Our best approach is to split into 2 teams, one coming up the main road, the other circling through the lighthouse property to cut off the service path." Diana studied the map, mentally calculating angles and timing. "How close can vehicles get without being detected?" "About a quarter-mile on the main road. After that, the engine noise would carry, even in this storm." She nodded decisively. "Marcus, you'll lead the team from the lighthouse side with Captain Dawson. I'll take the main approach with the State Police Tactical Unit." She checked her watch. "We move in 30 minutes. Synchronized communications and weapons check now." As the teams prepared, Diana stepped away briefly, finding shelter under the ranger station's small porch. She dialed Margaret Mitchell's number, knowing the woman deserved an update. "We've located Kendrick's likely hideout," Diana said when Margaret answered. "We're moving in shortly." A moment of silence followed, then Margaret's voice came through, tight with emotion. "Bring him back alive, Diana. I need to face him. I need him to face justice in a courtroom, not take the easy way out." "I understand," Diana replied, though part of her wondered if bringing Kendrick back alive would truly serve justice better than the alternative. "I'll do everything in my power." The call ended and Diana rejoined the tactical team, accepting a heavy-duty raincoat from one of the state troopers. As she slipped it on over her tactical vest, her mind flashed back to the preserved body of Emily Mitchell, posed like a macabre raté installation. The image steeled her resolve. Whatever happened tonight, James Kendrick's freedom was ending. Inside the white cottage, Kendrick moved with practiced efficiency, gathering only what was essential for his continued escape. The transformation from distinguished professor to nondescript traveler was nearly complete. His silver-streaked hair now dyed a mousy brown, wire-rimmed glasses replaced with colored contacts, distinguished beard shaved clean. The storm raged outside, winds battering the cottage with increasing ferocity. It was both blessing and curse-providing cover for his departure, but complicating the journey ahead. His original plan had been to take the small motorboat docked at the private jetty below the cliffs, following the coastline north to a marina where a car waited under yet another false identity. The turbulent seas now made that route nearly suicidal. Kendrick moved to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass at the narrow service path that wound down toward the lighthouse. That would be his best option now, on foot through the storm, emerging on the other side of the peninsula where public transportation could carry Martin Webb, away from the manhunt for James Kendrick. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the landscape and Kendrick froze. In that brief moment of clarity, he had seen something, a shadow moving among the trees near the service path. Perhaps just a branch swaying in the wind, but his instincts, honed by months of vigilance, triggered alarm bells in his mind. He extinguished the cottage lights immediately, plunging the interior into darkness. Moving silently to a cabinet near the kitchen, he retrieved a loaded handgun, the same weapon he had used to wound Robert when their partnership collapsed. The irony wasn't lost on him. Robert had been the one fascinated with Emily first, yet in the end, he had proven too weak to embrace the artistic vision that had driven Kendrick for years. Through another window, Kendrick scanned the main road approach. Another lightning flash revealed nothing unusual, but he remained unconvinced. The timing was too perfect, the storm providing ideal cover for law enforcement as well as for his escape. Had Anderson betrayed him? Had he remembered the cottage from their conversations? Kendrick weighed his options rapidly. The boat remained viable as a last resort, dangerous but potentially unexpected. The service path might be compromised. The main road was the most obvious approach for authorities. That left. His gaze shifted to the rough trail that skirted the edge of the cliffs themselves. In good weather, it was treacherous enough to deter most hikers. In this storm, it would be nearly impassable, which made it the perfect escape route for someone desperate enough to risk it. Decision made, Kendrick grabbed his waterproof pack and moved toward the rear door. He would abandon most of his carefully gathered supplies. But the essentials were secure: new identity documents, emergency cash, and the small notebook containing contacts who could help him rebuild once he was clear of the immediate manhunt. As Diana led her team through the driving rain, visibility had deteriorated to less than 20 feet. They had abandoned the vehicles as planned, proceeding on foot with tactical lights providing minimal illumination. Communication with Marcus's team came in broken bursts through their radios, the storm interfering with signal clarity. Approaching from lighthouse side. No visual yet. Proceeding with caution. Diana signaled her team to spread out, maintaining their advance toward the cottage. The tactical officers moved like ghosts through the darkness, their training evident in every deliberate step. Diana felt the familiar tension of an approaching confrontation, the heightened awareness, the careful control of breathing, the hyper-focus that filtered out everything except the objective. Sudden burst of static from her radio was followed by Marcus's urgent voice. Movement detected on cliff path. Repeat, suspect spotted moving along cliff edge. Diana immediately redirected her team, angling toward the rocky precipice where the land fell away to the churning Atlantic below. The path Kendrick had chosen was barely visible in daylight in this storm. Navigating it was either an act of supreme confidence or utter desperation. "He's trying to circle around to the lighthouse dock," Captain Dawson's voice came through. "There's a maintenance shed there with emergency boats." "Cut him off," Diana ordered. "We'll approach from behind. Do not let him reach the water." Lightning flashed again, and for a brief moment, Diana caught sight of a figure moving along the cliff edge about 100 yards ahead, a dark silhouette hunched against the wind, picking its way carefully along the treacherous path. When darkness returned, she maintained her bearing, increasing her pace despite the dangerous conditions. The ground beneath her feet changed from forest loam to slick rock as she reached the cliff path. Rain lashed at her face, the wind threatening to push her toward the precipice with each powerful gust. Diana unholstered her weapon, keeping it pointed safely downward as she advanced. 50 yards ahead now, Kendrick sensed the pursuit closing in. Another lightning flash had revealed figures behind him on the path, moving with the unmistakable purpose of law enforcement rather than the caution of rescue personnel. His options were narrowing by the second. The path ahead split, one fork continuing along the cliff toward the lighthouse, the other descending via crude stone steps to a small rocky beach where emergency boats were sometimes launched. If he could reach one of those boats, a shout carried through the storm. "Kendrick, this is Sheriff Reynolds. Stop where you are." He didn't hesitate, didn't look back. Choosing the descending path, Kendrick began moving down the slippery stone steps, one hand gripping the rough rock face for stability, the other still holding his gun. Diana saw his choice and immediately recognized the danger. "He's heading for the beach access. Marcus, can you intercept?" "Negative," came the crackled response. Paths washed out on this side were redirecting to the lighthouse dock. Diana holstered her weapon and began the treacherous descent, signaling the tactical team to hold their position and cover the exit points. This narrow stairway carved into the cliff face was too dangerous for multiple pursuers in these conditions. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, the thunder following almost immediately. In that brilliant illumination, Diana saw Kendrick just 20 yards below, his transformed appearance not quite disguising his distinctive movements. He had reached a small plateau halfway down the cliff face, momentarily pausing to find his footing on the increasingly flooded steps. "James Kendrick," Diana called out, her voice fighting against the howling wind. "There's nowhere to go. The Coast Guard has the waters secured." Whether he heard her or not, Kendrick continued his descent. Another flash of lightning revealed how precarious their positions had become. The lower section of steps was now partially submerged by the rising storm surge, waves crashing against the cliff base with frightening force. Diana continued her careful pursuit, the gap between them closing with each cautious step. The rain had soaked through her tactical gear, plastering her hair to her face and numbing her fingers. But her focus remained absolute in the footing beneath her, on the figure below, on bringing this nightmare to its end. Kendrick reached the bottom of the steps, only to find his escape route compromised by the storm. The small beach where emergency boats were normally secured had all but disappeared beneath the surging waters. A single small craft remained, straining against its mooring rope as waves threatened to dash it against the rocks. It was a death trap. Attempting to launch in these conditions would be suicide. Yet as Diana closed to within 15 yards, she watched Kendrick move toward the boat with determined purpose. "It's over, James," she shouted, finally reaching the bottom of the steps, her weapon drawn once more. "Step away from the boat." Kendrick turned then, his face illuminated by a flash of lightning, transformed by his disguise, yet unmistakable in its cold calculation. For a moment he seemed to consider his options, glancing from Diana to the raging sea beyond. Then, with deliberate calm that chilled Diana more than the storm ever could, James Kendrick raised his gun not toward her but to his own temple. No artist is ever appreciated in his time, he called out, his voice somehow carrying over the tempest. But history will understand my vision. Diana lunged forward as Kendrick's finger tensed on the trigger. The next lightning flash revealed two figures locked in desperate struggle at the edge of the surging waters. As the full fury of the Atlantic storm engulfed the rocky beach below Osprey Cliffs, the waves struck with crushing force, sweeping Diana and Kendrick off their feet. For a terrifying moment, Diana was submerged in frigid, churning darkness, her sense of direction completely lost as the current pulled her away from shore. She fought against the panic rising in her chest, forcing her body to go momentarily limp to conserve oxygen before kicking hard toward what she hoped was the surface. Her head broke the water just as another wave formed. Gasping for breath, Diana caught a glimpse of Kendrick struggling about 10 yards away, his gun lost to the sea. The undertow was dragging them both toward the jagged rocks at the base of the cliff. "Reynolds," Captain Dawson's voice called from somewhere above. A powerful spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the churning waters around them. Diana struck out toward Kendrick, her law enforcement training overriding her personal feelings about the man. Justice would not be served by letting him drown Margaret. Mitchell deserved to see him stand trial for what he had done to Emily. As she neared him, Kendrick's eyes locked with hers, revealing not fear but a calculating coldness that remained intact even in the face of death. With a sudden, deliberate movement, he dove beneath the surface, clearly intending to escape rather than accept rescue. Diana hesitated only a fraction of a second before diving after him. Beneath the turbulent surface, the water was slightly calmer but pitch black. The spotlight from above penetrated only a few feet, creating eerie shafts of visibility in the underwater darkness. She caught a glimpse of movement to her right and changed direction, powerful strokes carrying her toward Kendrick's fleeing form. Her lungs began to burn as she closed the distance. Kendrick was swimming with surprising skill toward an underwater shelf of rock that extended from the cliff base. If he reached it, he could potentially navigate to a different exit point, evading the authorities positioned above. With a final burst of effort, Diana lunged forward, her hand catching Kendrick's ankle. He kicked violently, his shoe connecting with her shoulder, but she maintained her grip. They surfaced together in the trough between waves, both gasping for air. "It's over, Kendrick," Diana managed between breaths, maintaining her hold as she tried to orient them toward the rescue lines now being lowered from above. "Nothing is over," he snarled, his carefully constructed facade finally cracking to reveal the madness beneath. "My work will continue. Emily was just the beginning, the perfect vessel for my vision." Another wave crashed over them, briefly separating them before Diana reestablished her grip on his jacket. As they surfaced again, a rescue line splashed down just yards away. "Grab the line," came a shout from above. Diana reached for it, pulling it toward them with one hand while maintaining her hold on Kendrick with the other. "Take it," she ordered him, "now." For a moment it seemed Kendrick would comply, his hand extended toward the line, his struggle subsiding. Then, with shocking swiftness, he twisted in Diana's grip, his fingers clawing at her face, aiming for her eyes. "I will not be caged," he screamed, his voice barely audible above the storm. "My art cannot be contained." Diana reacted instinctively, blocking his attack and striking back with a defensive blow that caught him under the chin. Kendrick's head snapped back, momentarily stunning him. In that brief window, Diana looped the rescue line around her wrist and grabbed Kendrick in a secure hold used for water rescues. "Pull us up," she shouted toward the lights above. The line went taut, slowly drawing them away from the worst of the churning waters toward the cliff face. Kendrick continued to struggle, but weakly now, the combination of cold water and exertion sapping his strength. As they neared the rocky base, tactical team members were descending the stone steps, reaching out to secure them. "I've got you, Sheriff," one officer called, extending a rescue pole toward Diana. She grabbed it with her free hand, allowing herself to be pulled onto a relatively stable rock ledge just above the waterline. Two officers immediately took custody of Kendrick, securing him in restraints despite his waterlogged, exhausted state. Diana collapsed under the wet rock, adrenaline ebbing to leave her shaking with cold and exertion. Marcus appeared beside her, draping an emergency blanket over her shoulders. "That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen," he said, the relief in his voice belying his critical words. "Probably both," Diana admitted, watching as Kendrick was carefully but firmly escorted up the stone steps, multiple officers ensuring he had no opportunity to attempt another escape or suicide. "The helicopter can't land in this weather," Marcus informed her. "We'll need to transport him by vehicle once we reach the top." Diana nodded, accepting Marcus's help to stand. Her entire body ached, but a sense of grim satisfaction pushed through the discomfort. James Kendrick would face justice for what he had done to Emily Mitchell. The nightmare that had gripped Fairhaven for 8 months was finally approaching its end. As they made their slow ascent up the treacherous steps, Diana observed Kendrick ahead of her. Even in custody, soaking wet and stripped of his disguise, there was something unnervingly composed about him. The brief glimpse of madness she had witnessed in the water had receded. replaced by the same calculating coldness that had allowed him to move through academic and social circles for years without raising suspicion. When they finally reached the top of the cliff, the storm was beginning to abate slightly, the wind no longer at dangerous levels, though rain continued to fall steadily. Emergency vehicles had maneuvered as close as possible to their location, lights casting red and blue patterns across the wet landscape. As Kendrick was led toward a waiting police transport, Diana's phone rang. Remarkably, it had survived its submersion in a waterproof case. The screen displayed Margaret Mitchell's name. "Margaret," Diana answered, moving under the minimal shelter of a pine tree. "We have him. Kendrick is in custody." A long silence followed, filled only by the sound of steady breathing. When Margaret finally spoke, her voice was composed but tight with emotion. "Is he? Did he try to?" "He's alive," Diana confirmed, watching as Kendrick was secured in the transport vehicle. "He'll face trial for what he did to Emily." "Thank you," Margaret whispered. I need to look him in the eyes." Diana understood. The need for confrontation, for answers, for some semblance of closure was powerful. Whether those answers would provide any comfort was another question entirely. "We're transporting him back to Fairhaven now," Diana said. "The forensics team will continue processing the cottage, but our preliminary search confirmed it was his hideout. We found disguise materials, false identification, and hesitated, uncertain how much detail to share." "And what?" Margaret pressed. "Sketches, preliminary designs for future projects." Diana couldn't bring herself to use the word victims, though that was precisely what the sketches represented: young women Kendrick had been observing and considering as his next artistic vessels. The implication hung silently between them. Emily hadn't been meant to be his only victim, merely his first. "I'm coming to the station," Margaret said decisively. "Margaret, it's the middle of the night, and I've waited 8 months for answers, Diana. I won't wait any longer." Diana knew better than to argue. "I'll meet you there. It will take us a few hours to return." As the call ended, Diana rejoined the convoy, now preparing to depart from Osprey Cliffs. The prisoner transport containing Kendrick would be sandwiched between multiple police vehicles, with state troopers monitoring every intersection along their route back to Connecticut. Inside the transport, Kendrick sat motionless on the bench, hands and ankles secured, a tactical officer watching him vigilantly. When Diana entered to perform a final check before departure, his eyes lifted to meet hers with unsettling directness. "You think this is the end," he said, his voice quiet but perfectly clear. "But art transcends captivity, Sheriff Reynolds. The truly visionary are never understood in their time." Diana regarded him coldly. "Save your philosophical posturing for the courtroom, Professor. I'm sure the jury will be fascinated by your artistic vision." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Do you know why I chose Emily Mitchell, Sheriff?" Diana didn't respond, but something in her expression must have betrayed her curiosity. She had an exceptional quality, a luminescence that ordinary people lack. "I recognized it instantly, just as I recognize it in you." His gaze traveled over her face with disturbing intensity. "That same rare quality. It's why you pursued me so relentlessly." "We're connected now, you and I. We're nothing alike," Diana said sharply, fighting the chill his words sent through her. "And the only connection between us is that I'm the one who put you in those restraints." Kendrick's smile widened slightly. "For now." Diana turned away, disturbed not by the implied threat but by the absolute conviction in his voice. James Kendrick genuinely believed in his twisted worldview, reality that made him far more dangerous than a simple murderer acting on impulse or passion. As the convoy began its journey south through the storm-battered Maine countryside, Diana found herself contemplating the strange duality of the man they had captured. To the academic world, he had been brilliant, respected, even beloved by many students. To his colleagues, including Robert Anderson, he had been persuasive enough to draw them into his madness. Yet beneath that carefully constructed persona lurked something profoundly inhuman, a mind that viewed people not as individuals, but as raw material for his disturbed artistic expression. How many others like Kendrick were out there, she wondered, predators hiding behind respectable facades, selecting victims from positions of trust and authority? The thought was deeply unsettling, particularly as the investigation had revealed how methodically Kendrick had planned his actions, how patiently he had waited for the perfect opportunity. The rain continued to fall as they crossed back into Connecticut, a gentle, cleansing downpour now rather than the violent storm that had nearly claimed their lives on the cliff. Diana watched the familiar landscape emerge through the dawn light, knowing that Fairhaven would never be quite the same again. The sense of security of knowing one's neighbors and trust in community leaders had been profoundly shaken, but perhaps from this tragedy, as Margaret had suggested, something positive might emerge: greater awareness, better protection, a commitment to ensuring that positions of trust could not so easily be abused. It was a small consolation for the loss of Emily Mitchell, but it was something to work toward in the difficult days ahead. As the convoy approached Fairhaven, Diana prepared herself for what promised to be one of the most challenging aspects of the case: facilitating the confrontation between Margaret Mitchell and the man who had stolen her daughter's life and violated her memory in death. What answers could possibly satisfy a mother's grief? What justice could truly balance such a horrific crime? These questions had no easy answers, but Diana was determined to see the process through to its conclusion for Emily, for Margaret, and for a community that deserved the full truth. However painful it might be,